Laura G. Holland with us. She has been teaching English language for more than 35 years, and she's also into training teachers. She has a lot of experience, and we're just so happy to have her here with us today and to be able to share on this session of summative observation, removing fears, setting challenges, and positive results. So Laura, the stage is all yours. Remember, everybody can join us here on stage. If you want, just activate your camera and keep your microphones muted until we have any participation time. And if not, you can also join us through the chat, either through the chat itself or questions and answers. If there is a question you want to leave there, so towards the end of the presentation, we will have a time to answer all those questions. And also remember that this session is being recorded, so you can replay it later on the replay option. Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dee. And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. As Dee said, my presentation is called Summative Observation, Removing Fear, Setting Challenges, Positive Results. So I am an English language teacher first and foremost. I am also first and foremost a language teacher educator and teacher trainer. And then a side job I have started the last few years as that, Tanya, hello. A side job that I have begun is that I am hired now from a few different institutes to be their external reviewer, which means that I come in once a year and I observe all the teachers, and then I have to, so that's the fun part, right? Observing all the teachers is awesome. I learn so much with every single observation. The only part of the job I don't love is that I am required, very much so, to give a grade, and it's a very high stakes kind of grade for teachers because their salaries and their promotions and the courses that they get will be based, and sometimes their employment, future employment, are based on these. So when I first started doing a lot of these observations in the institutes and then in my own institute, I've discovered there was such a culture of fear that teachers were absolutely horrified and terrified and traumatized by this whole process. And it just seems to me, as a teacher and a teacher educator, there's no reason for this. It doesn't help. It doesn't help when we scare teachers. It's not going to make them perform better. So I'm going to share with you several different ideas and procedures and some new ideas I hope to think about and some ways to deal with this. Now if you are a classroom teacher only and you're not any kind of a supervisor, please don't expect this to be a classroom teaching kind of session. Tomorrow I'm giving one of those, but this is our supervisor and evaluators hats. However, you are absolutely welcome to stay even if you are not a supervisor, because maybe you will be one day and maybe you will try to do this. So I'm hoping you get some good ideas. These ideas are also good for even just pure observation. So let's jump in. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Wait. How do I get my... Dee? It's not moving to the next slide. What do I do to click the next slide?
On the bottom part, you should have the arrows. Or if not, with your keyboard, maybe try.
Yeah, I tried the arrows on the keyboard. This is.
Are you using the Chrome tab or are you using the PowerPoint?
I'm using the. I was using the my computer tabs.
Okay, but are you sharing from a PowerPoint or from a Google slide?
I'm sharing from a PowerPoint. Yeah.
Just make sure you click on PowerPoint first.
Sorry, where?
Let's see.
Sorry, everybody. We'll get there in just a second. It's worked in the test session perfectly.
It did.
But I was using a different PowerPoint. We tested out my other one. So interesting.
Do you want to stop sharing and try again? Maybe it froze it.
Yes, let's do that because it did freeze before. So stop sharing, right? And then now let's try sharing again. I don't see any arrows.
Let's see.
Oh wait, there we go. Okay, now it's working. It was frozen before. Okay, woohoo! Okay, that disaster was avoided. So, our agenda for today. In this workshop, I'm going to give a quick rationale, which I already gave a little bit of, an introduction and rationale. And we're going to discuss fact-based observation and what that entails. I have 2 tasks for you. We're going to practice using positive language to give both positive and corrective feedback to teachers that we've observed. And we'll begin to engage in a couple of scenarios so that you can just practice some of these ideas that we are discussing today to help create a more positive evaluation process for everybody involved, both the observed teachers and the observing teachers. Now, one of the things is I'm going to be using some terms about observed teachers. So that's the teacher who's teaching and being observed, right? And then the observing teachers. So for example, if you're a supervisor, and you go into somebody's class, you are the observing teacher. So observed teacher, observing teacher, or visited teacher, visiting teacher. Those are the terms that I'm going to be using. And one of the things is that we really can make a huge difference in terms of teacher motivation when we dive in and collaborate with them and create a situation where we are working together. And I'm going to take you through, let's see. But first, let's take a quick peek at the definition and just remember the distinction between summative observation and formative observation. So formative observation is non-evaluative, right? It's used for professional development purposes only. There's no grade, no score associated with this kind of evaluation. And the feedback is used to observe and refine our goals. Good afternoon if you're just joining us. Summative observation, on the other hand, is evaluative in nature. It's almost always associated with some kind of score or grade, often very high stakes for the teachers, and feedback that can be corrective. So first, I want to take a quick peek. Let's know who we all are here together. How many of you have been evaluated? Write yes in the chat if you have been evaluated before in a summative observation. If you were, yeah, okay, yes. Pretty much everybody, right? We've all been evaluated. And how many of you, I know one person at least, are the supervisors who are the evaluators? Please write S for supervisor. If you are a supervisor. Okay, D is 1. Santi, I know you are, yeah. Anybody else? Or thinking about becoming a supervisor? Okay, great. So excellent. All right. Well, you are in the right place. So one of the things that, and I'm going to ask the final question in a moment. Okay, good. It looks like everybody here is in this role, in this position. Teachers get very nervous, of course. I do too. I've been teaching for 1,000 years since dinosaurs were roaming the planet. And I still get a little bit nervous when I know I'm going to be observed for a summative observation. Even though I feel very confident in my classes, my students love my classes, I love my students, my classes are really well done, but I still get nervous. Now, there's a difference between being a little nervous / excited and being terrified. And what I fear is that many supervisors around the globe have terrified the teachers. And I've seen in my own program, I've seen some teachers doing it, and there's just no reason. It doesn't help. It doesn't make our teachers better. It doesn't make them more motivated, and it doesn't make them achieve any of our school's missions or objectives. So, we have this idea where this is what teachers feel like over here, like, I'm watching you, or even worse, I'm watching you, right? And so that's what they feel like. Now, questions to you all. Has fear ever been a part of this process for you on either end of it, being observed or observing somebody else? Have you ever felt fear? You can just write yes. Yes. Okay. Yes, 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 yes. Right? Okay. So it's not necessary and it doesn't help. Let's find some other things that we could do. So again, we want to move from this to I'm watching you to this, to the image below. So just like with our language students, we want to raise the teacher's motivation. We want to help them develop skills and independent learning and to inspire them to continue every single year with their professional development. It's really critically important. And yes, Santi earlier said, we want to help them to be better teachers. We absolutely do. That is everybody's objective. But how we do it is the key, critically important piece. So now I have a quick task for you. And I'm going to show you in one moment a picture. And I'd like you to take about 10 seconds or so, have a look at the picture, and see if you can figure out what is going on in it. And then you can either share your ideas in the chat. Please just say, the question is, what's going on in this picture? And you can share your ideas in the chat, or you can ask to speak and unmute yourselves. So here's the picture. All right, what is going on in this picture? Again, think for a moment and then share via the chat or ask to speak. Yeah, we want to inspire teachers. We don't want to terrify them. That doesn't do anybody any good. All right, what's going on in this? I'm going to use my best teacher wait time. Okay, Denise says maybe praying. Oh, hi, Denise. I know you from somewhere. Praying. That was my first thought when I saw this picture too. Anybody else? Anybody have a different idea? What else is going on in this picture? Students are being punished. That's another one that comes up every time. Yeah, it looks like they could be punished with that posture that they're having. And a lot of people think this guy over here is very menacing, very, there we go, Denise. Yep, that's another one that we've come up with. That's one of the ones I like. They're looking for a coin that fell between the cracks. Or another idea that I have is they're on a dock over the water and a huge fish or whale or shark or something came swimming through and they're all like, oh, whoa, look at that. There's a shark in there. So different things. Okay, true confessions time. I don't have any idea what's going on in this picture. I do not know. This is a classic DIE picture, describe, interpret, evaluate. And I have a whole series of these that I use with my students. But interesting, right? We look at this picture, we see, okay, maybe they're praying, maybe they're being punished, maybe they're looking for something, maybe, who knows, many different ideas. Well, I use this as a metaphor for the classroom because as observers, when we go into somebody's classroom, what ends up happening is that we bring everything we believe about teaching, all of our baggage and all of our preconceptions about what best practices are, we bring those in. And I worked with a teacher a few years ago who, he no longer is in our program, he's long gone. But he believed, he had the very stated philosophy that teachers should use technology every hour of every day that they teach in order to reach 21st century learners. Now, didn't matter how boring his lesson was, I observed him teaching and he used technology every single hour. I also saw his students were laying in the back ready to kill themselves because he was a challenging teacher. But he went into other teachers' classrooms and it didn't matter how dynamic the class was, how awesome the activity was or how it met the day's objectives. If they did not use technology during his observation, he gave them a big red X and scored them way lower on that. It didn't matter that the lesson was dynamic, active. He had this preconceived knowledge, this preconceived idea that you have to have technology in every single hour. So basically, anybody he observed, we gave another observation to see what was really going on in their classes. All right, now let's take a peek at my second task. What is and isn't a fact? This activity is going to take a little bit longer because we're going to kind of get into it together and workshop this together. So I'm going to read a passage aloud to you. I have it on the next slide. It's all, it's in kind of small print, so I apologize for that, but I will read it out loud to you, and I'm going to ask you to just follow along with it and read. And by the way, just for teachers, that's an awesome technique to do for reading that helps our students read much faster than they can without on their own. So then I'm going to read out loud to you. You are going to cross out everything that is not a fact, and then we'll share our answers together. But keep in mind, we are not all going to agree on every answer, and that is cool. That is okay. So here's the paragraph. Again, I apologize, it's so small and so much text, but just listen and read along if you can. Handicap, this comes from a book called Developing Teachers, Not Just Techniques by Douglas Heath. Now, I really love that title. I think that's a great title. Handicap number 3. Mr. Schmidt, as he preferred to be called, was a scholarly German immigrant who had found his way to a small, isolated, rural school where he taught 10th graders modern European history. He was talking pedantically about the Nazi invasion of Poland when I entered. He seemed so inwardly focused on his lecture that he never saw his drowsy and obviously bored students when he infrequently glanced at them. He never once varied the rate of his speech, stopped to ask a question, or showed in any way he was aware that these children of farmers may never have heard of the Nazis or may not know where Poland, let alone Europe is, or the meanings of about every 5th word that he uttered. He was the only teacher who did not seek me out later to learn what I might suggest about his teaching. All right, so that's a lot. It's a dense phrase. We're going to break it down now, sentence by sentence. And what I want you to do is you can either unmute yourself and call out an answer, or you can type it in the chat. What we're going to do is take out anything that is not a fact. Okay, so. But I'm going to give a quick explanation about this handicap number 3 because it's confusing. It's not a normal way of seeing something. Excuse me. And the way this was structured, this was in the introduction to this book that I found this in. That was new at the time when I used it, but it's an old book, actually. It's from the mid-1980s. And he had 6 different scenarios of 6 different teacher observations in there. And he gave a paragraph like this one about each one. And he called them handicap number 1, handicap number 2, handicap number 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this one was number 3. And so he said, so let's go through this now. First of all, does anybody have anything to say about handicap number 3 as the title of this paragraph? Anybody? Either you can speak or you can type it. What do we think? I'm going to drink my water while using my teacher wait time. Do we know what handicap means? Hey, Jessie.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. How are you? First of all, thank you for the conference. Really, your presentation is really great. Second of all, I wanted to say about Mr. Schmidt. I believe, although it seems unreal, it's part of our reality. there are many teachers that actually are very knowledgeable about the topic that they handle, but they don't really care too much about if they are understood or not.
Right.
I've noticed that with some colleagues in a technological institute, in which some of my students told me that they really didn't like the teacher because they were afraid of the teacher, that he was going, somehow he pressured them to complete a task, and if they didn't, he was going to fail
Exactly.
them. And the thing is that they say we couldn't ask if we didn't understand something, because he was like, he went straight forward to teach, but it was an error of mathematics or something, and then he left. So
right.
It's not a surprise, this kind of situation, but
it's not. But what can we do about this? So handicap 3, do we think that that's a helpful thing to say? Do we think that's a helpful way to label the paragraph?
No, definitely no. It has a negative connotation completely.
It has a negative connotation. Exactly, Jessie. So let's look at some of the others too. Mr. Schmidt, as he preferred to be called, what do we think? Is that a fact or is it not a fact? Yes or no? Would you keep it or take it out? And everybody, you can answer in the chat too.
I will take it out. I mean, it doesn't need to be, it's not a fact for me.
Yeah, maybe it is a fact. Maybe when they were being introduced, maybe he said, please call me Mr. Schmidt. Possible. But why is that in here? Why is that relevant? And what does that have to do with the observation of his class? I have no idea. So I would take it out because it's not relevant at all. Was a scholarly German immigrant who had found his way to a small, isolated rural school where he taught 10th graders modern European history. Who can write or tell or write the sentence that, how could we transform that into a facts-only sentence? Well, we would take out, what might we take out? Is it
the part that he had found his way to a small, isolated rural school? I mean, just that he taught 10 graders. That's it, modern European.
That's exactly what I think too, Jessie. I think Mr. Schmidt taught 10th graders modern European history. And maybe we could say he's a non-native speaker of English. But is that relevant? He's not an English teacher. He's a modern European history teacher. I don't even think it is. Yeah, that's a fact. The rest of the stuff, that he's scholarly. So when we are writing, when we're doing observations, we want to be very careful about the adjectives that we use, right? Now, yesterday I was in a great session with Beatriz and Angela, and they were talking about the teacher giving out a blue pen and a red pen and a green pen and a purple pen for chain stories, for example. Then, yes, we want those adjectives because they tell us about the activity. They tell us about the lesson. But this scholarly, what does that tell us? That doesn't tell me anything at all about this class. Let's move on to the next one. Sentences 2 and 3. He was talking pedantically about the Nazi invasion of Poland when I entered. Is there anything in here we could take out? Pedantically, yeah. What is that doing in there? Okay, and also what's pedantically to one person is maybe not pedantically to another person. So what we're trying to do is build a common language, not these skew lines that never connect, right? Next one. He seemed so inwardly focused on his lecture that he never saw his drowsy and obviously bored students when he infrequently glanced at them. Okay, well, what do we think? Anybody have an idea about this one? I like to
write your answers over here in the chat.
Yeah, it's all opinion, right, Denise? Yeah. I mean, maybe he seemed, so that helps a little bit, but really doesn't have any place in this part of the observation. Okay, that he saw his drowsy students and obviously bored students. Well, that's a judgment he's making. We can't know that for sure. When he infrequently glanced at them. Well, what's infrequent? Okay, again, that's going to mean one thing to one person and one thing to another. Right, that's the implication. He's not paying attention to his students. I agree, Santi. But I think that there are different ways that we can go about dealing with when we see somebody doing something like this. Sentence 4. He never once varied the rate of his speech, stopped to ask a question, or showed in any way he was aware that these children or farmers may never have heard of the Nazis or may not know where Poland, let alone where Europe is, or the meanings of about every fifth word that he uttered. Yeah, D needs to be more factual, right? Okay, what do we think about this one? This one, my students go crazy when they read this one because, okay, first of all, not even possible that he never, I mean, it's physically not possible to not vary the rate of your speech, but maybe he talked like this the whole time and kept it pretty much the same all the time. Maybe so. Maybe he never stopped to ask a question. That could be a fact, but we don't know what the objective of the lesson was. Maybe the teacher was trying to prepare them for a college lecture, or maybe where they would not have the chance to interrupt, or maybe he was preparing them for their standardized tests. We don't know because Douglas Heath has not shared any of that important information with us. All we know about this. And by the way, I went to university in a state that has a lot of farmland. And I had a lot of friends who grew up on farms. And they knew where Europe was. They knew about Poland. They knew about the Nazis. They were so insulted when they heard this, as if people who grow up in rural places don't know about any of this. Please. So this is not only not helpful, it's insulting to the students and the teacher. So in sentence 4, I think he's really gone over the edge here. He was the only teacher who did not seek me out later to learn what I might suggest about his teaching. Big surprise, right? Okay, well, that could be a fact. We could keep that in there, but what does it tell us about the classroom? So here's the thing. The whole reason I go through this with people is I know so much more about Douglas Heath, the observer, than I know about this actual class that he was observing. I know this much about the class he was observing, and a lot of it I'm not sure about. I have to speculate myself, but I don't know anything. I know a whole lot about Douglas Heath, though, and I also know I never, ever want him to set foot in any classroom of me or any of the teachers I work with. He's like, no, you are out. So let's talk for a minute about fact-based observation. It's a really simple switch that we can make as supervisors and observers. And once I started doing it, I could not believe the huge changes that it invites and that it makes in the whole process. It changes the dynamic of the process. So what did the teacher say and do? What did the students say and do? Note the time markers and note maybe classroom configurations, like draw a little drawing of how the teacher has the room set up. So let's look through a couple of different models of that. So here is one model. I have a few different models of notes that I do. And, I should start, though, by saying, Santi, you know this one, my notebook. Okay, so I'm old school. I like to take all my notes by hand. But nothing wrong with doing them on the computer if you're fast enough at that and you want to do that. But what I do is, here's my system. I have my notebook, and then I have an observation. Here, let's start here. Start here. And I don't know if you can see, I have about 4/5 of the paper are my notes. And these are facts only. Again, what did the teacher say and do? What are the students saying and doing? Over here in the corners, I note the time. So I'm constantly looking at my watch not because I'm thinking, ooh, this is taking too long. No, it's so that I can see how long and use the fact of how long that was. And then we talk about that in our discussion afterwards. And then over here on the other side, it's very hard to see, but in another color, that's where I put any suggestions or any different alternatives. And I'll talk about those in just a moment. So here's where the time goes, right? This column is all I work on during the observation. And in this column is only facts. So for example, the teacher introduces an audio listening activity, asks the students to take out pencil and put out all books and papers away, and passes out papers. Okay? All facts, right? That's what the teacher said and did. Now we can work with that. Afterwards, then after I'm done with the observation and I go home and I'm doing my homework, then we do this, alternatives. And what is this? It's to build our teaching toolboxes. So, for example, let's say the teacher introduced all the directions verbally. Okay, well, another way you could do that, not because there's anything wrong with that, but just to build our alternatives, our options. Maybe you could put the information on the slide, or you could have students pass papers around, or ask a student to pass out the papers, or have a student leader of the day who does that job. Okay, and then over in this final column is where we can think about, okay, well, what would these be good for? Well, putting the information on the slide would be really good for giving visual support, especially maybe at lower proficiency levels, so they can hear and read at the same time. Or having the students pass the papers around, or asking student to pass out the papers. Maybe that's great if you have a really large class, right? And you don't want to pass out individually to every single student because that will just take too much time. Or you can, think about, ooh, this would be really good if you're working with K through 12 with younger students, or if you're working with, I want to make it more challenging. So that's what this column is for. And now let's take a quick look at an example of some good notes, and then I will show you in a minute of some less good notes, or bad notes, as I'm calling them. And again, it's a little bit small. It doesn't matter. We don't have to read all of this. It's just to get the idea of how this kind of observation works. Yeah, my notebook, Santi. You know these notebooks. Okay, so here I have the time marker, right? 9:45 a.m. The room is arranged in islands, in groups of 4, or, for example, and I put that in part of my notes too. I make a drawing of what the room, how is the teacher rearranged the room in order to meet the objectives of that activity. And then she gives her directions. And then later she says she has them consulting in their small groups with each other. And then she says, okay, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. So here, the room is arranged in islands of 4 students, and the teacher stands in front with the chart on the board. Okay, nothing wrong with it. Great, one way to do this. Now, together with the other person, with the person I'm observing, I can talk, and we can say in our post-observation conversation, in our feedback session, we can do a little brainstorming together. It's like, okay, here's how we did this. What do we think are some other possible ways that might be useful for this? Well, maybe the tables could be arranged in one big circle, or maybe they could be arranged in smaller circles around the room, okay, for example. Again, here's different ways to give instructions. Here now she said, okay, she had them talking, and then she pulled their attention back by saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, which is a lovely little rhyme for working with kids. And it was beautiful. It worked wonderfully in the class. But here's another one. Maybe we could use a sound maker, right? I use sound makers all the time to call my students back, and then they know that they should finish their sentence and put their attention up. Or so I've seen some teachers flip the lights on and off, or other teachers just raise their hand and wait until everybody else raises their hand. Okay, that's a really popular old school one too. So what this does is this becomes a model of, here we have our facts, and then this becomes a way that we can just brainstorm together and expand all of our teaching toolboxes. It's not me, the expert, coming in and saying, you have to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. It's, hey, how can we become better at all this? How can we all become better at this? Okay, so just some example of some less good notes, some bad notes perhaps. Class is arranged in islands. It's a big class with many students. Okay, but what's a big class, right? So like, I know teachers who think 25 is in a class, is a big class. But then I work with teachers in China and parts of Africa, and they have between 100 and 200 students in their class. So what's big to one person is going to be not big to somebody else. Now, we could probably all agree that 100 students in a class is a big class. But again, these adjectives kind of get in the way. So let's pull them out and not put them in until this section. Keep them out of the fact-based. Okay, the teacher's speaking really slowly to give directions. Again, what's slow for one person is not slow necessarily for another. And also, what's slow for a level 2 student is not the same thing for a level 6 student. So it's all context driven, completely context driven. Okay, so these are just some examples of ways that we want to pull that out. And when we stick with facts, it makes our whole process clearer. Now, let's move on to a positive language practice. So, for example, let's start with what is positive, okay? So, even if the class you're observing is, and this is a terrible term, even if the word we use sometimes is, like it's a total train wreck, okay? An absolute disaster, okay? We've all observed some classes like that before. We know we have. But we can always find something positive to say. So I watched a train wreck one time, but I started off our feedback session by saying, I really appreciated your enthusiasm for the class, okay? It's a very nice way to say it. We want to try to remove fear. Remember, that's our objective. We want to remove the fear because it gets in the way. We can phrase anything, any potentially negative or corrective comments using positive language. We can say the harshest things in a really positive, respectful, and nice way that makes them feel more open. And in fact, has the teachers we're working with say, more, give me more, I'm ready, I can take this, okay? We have to remember what it feels like to receive, to be on the receiving end of harsh judgment, okay? Nobody likes that, and it doesn't help us be better teachers. It really doesn't. Now, glows and grows, that's a new term I just started using in the last year. My best friend read it somewhere or got it in some workshop. We used to use warm feedback and cool feedback, and I never really liked that so much. It was okay, but glows and grows, everybody just loves it. Students love it, student teachers love it, the teachers love it. It's great. The glows are what makes us glow and smile. What did we do? What did they do really great? What was so wonderful? We want to start with that. And then the grows, isn't that kind of a nice way to phrase? Here are some suggestions, right? And we're going to phrase them using our positive language. We're going to use our facts from our notes to begin comments. So for example, in your instructions, you told the students what to do and you gave them all the steps at once. Here's what you said. Okay, so all of that is a fact, right? In your instructions, you told the students what to do, right? You gave them all the steps at once, like boom, 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 and here's what you said. So basically what I'm doing is holding up a mirror to the teacher so they can assess themselves, right? It's so much more productive than asking than us just telling the teachers, right? Just like with our students, right? We want to help them develop their own inner criteria, as Gattegno used to talk about, of what good teaching is, what best practices are. And what's going to be best practices in one situation is going to be something different in another situation. So this is why fact-based observation is also very handy. We want to employ the first person plural. This is something I just started using a few years ago. For example, instead of saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, right, which feels horrible. Instead, first person plural, because I'm a teacher too. So you know what? When we let our students shout out the answers, it makes it really hard for us to hear and creates the situation where some students get fewer opportunities to produce than other students, right? So it becomes part of a conversation, and that's what we want. We want productive post-observation conversations. Some more positive language practice. Ask a question that gets the observed teachers reflecting on what they did and how they felt about it. So what were you thinking when you did blah, 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 blah? Or what were you hoping to achieve? Or how do you think it went? Okay, so we can ask them questions and get them to ask. But I would say we want to make sure we don't trick them into saying, how do you think it went? When I really thought it was terrible, and if then they say, okay, we want to be careful about that. So just keep that in mind. Again, the idea is we don't want to be scaring people. We want everybody to be improving, including ourselves. We can use open questions such as WH questions instead of closed, yes, no questions, which can kind of sound accusatory or judgmental. So for example, open questions they invite more conversation and thoughtful reflection. So what do you think? How do you think, did you like the way this lesson went versus how do you feel this went? I kind of like the second one a little bit better. Yeah, Santi, and then we reflect with people. Exactly. We end up having these fabulous conversations, and my conversations with the teachers is one of the most exciting things I do all year. I love our feedback sessions because it's all like, oh, we could do this, and 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 here's the reason it's so good to do this, and oh, I loved when you did this, and here's how I'm going to adapt it to my students, and blah, 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 right? I'm getting so excited. I'm talking because it's a really awesome, positive process. Now, feedback, both for our students and for the teachers we work with. The criteria of effective feedback are be specific, be honest, be direct, but also we need to be kind and encouraging. Now, if there are 35 different things that you would really like to see them changing, don't tell them all 35 at the same time. Give them 2 to 3 of the most salient areas of concern or celebration. And then later you can be saying things like, okay, next time now, your challenge for next week will be to try to blah, 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 blah. And then you just pick whatever is you're trying to work on, whatever issue you're trying to work on. So now what I'm going to do, we're running lower on time, is I'd like you to pick one of these. I have 10 different examples, and I'm going to just start putting them up. I will read them out loud so you can hear them. Pick one and just rephrase it in the chat using more positive language. And remember to use the number so we know which one you're doing. So number 1, your timing was off. Your activities went on too long. How do you make that more positive? Or you can just choose one of these. I have 10 or 9. You don't have your students' attention. They aren't listening to you. Okay, these are all things I have heard or read teachers saying to other teachers. These are all real, from real life. You have a problem with your classroom management. Your students aren't behaving. Your instructions are unclear. You need to make them clearer. Your class was really boring, right, Dee? So harsh, right? How's it gonna feel to hear that from your supervisor? You look like you hate your students. Oh gosh. Again, that teacher does not work with us anymore. You don't have control of your class. Your voice is too loud or too soft. Your pronunciation is too hard to understand, or your grammar is setting a bad example for our students. Okay, or one of your own. So go ahead now and choose one of those, write which number you're doing, like number 4, number 3, or 7, or 8, or whatever, and then rephrase it to be more positive. That's your task right now. Okay, Elena does number 1. Your timing was off. Your activities went on too long. Or, more positively, this activity took 50 minutes. Thank you. That is beautiful. Fact-based. And then you can have a conversation about this activity took 50 minutes. What do we think? Do we think that was the most effective way, or what would you do differently next time? But then we can just take it from criticism to a conversation that helps both of us. Any others? Thanks, Elena. That was an awesome one. Nice job. Okay, Santi does number 2. Let's use different activities so students will pay more attention. Okay, there we go. Let's try some variety. You've been doing the same, you did this activity and you did it in the exact same way 3 times. What if we varied it a little bit? Okay, your challenge for next week will be to try to come up with a couple different ways. Nice. Okay, D's got 4. It sometimes helps to clarify instructions by blah, 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 blah. Isn't that a much nicer, gentler way to hear your instructions were unclear? You need to make them clearer. That's not even helpful, right? It's not even helpful, but it sometimes helps to clarify instructions by maybe having them paraphrase or do it step by step or saying it back to you or using CCQs, confirmation check questions. Okay, so we've got now 5 different alternatives of how to make it more clear. Lourdes, you said number 5. Yeah, what would you do? Lourdes, how would you make number 5 more friendly? While you're doing that, Santi says, we can write and or model what students have to do. Yeah, we can do, that's a great thing, and that we could do together and make it a collaboration between the 2 of us. All right, I'm going to move on just because I want to make sure that I have time for questions. So collaborative examples, for example, oh, I like this, Lourdes. You're very important, so now it's time to go together. Look how nice that is. Wait, let's see. 6. You look like you hate your students. Oh, that's such a nicer way to do that, Lourdes. Awesome, right? So collaborative alternatives. Here's what you said and did. What are some other ways we could do this? And then we brainstorm together. What are other ways we might meet these same objectives? There was nothing wrong with the teacher did. In fact, it was awesome. But now we have different ways in case we're dealing, maybe next year, maybe we're teaching in an intensive English program now, but next year we're going to be in the academic program. Or maybe I'm working with adults, but my night job is, or maybe in the daytime I work with kids and my night job is working with adults. So how are we going to adapt this? So let's build our toolboxes. Here's something. This is mine, actually. I did this. I said this to a teacher I observed one time. I've never tried practicing questions in this way before. What do you think are some advantages of doing it this way? Why did you choose to do it like this? Do you have any tips for me when I try this with my students? Have you ever seen any other teacher doing this? Where'd you get this idea? Okay, so these are all questions I asked. And what I try to do in this one is put the teacher then who was observed into the position of being the expert and sharing their knowledge with me, right? So that it becomes this kind of circular back and forth, give and take. That's the dynamic I'm after. I noticed a bunch of your students were chatting in Spanish. I'm also having, or I've had this problem at times too, with my students all speaking in Chinese with each other, or wanting to chat in their L1s. Let's brainstorm a list of things that we can both try. Right? So much more collaborative. Or it seemed like you were getting frustrated that students couldn't understand how to form their questions using the auxiliaries do, be, and have. Do you have any ideas to try? What if we tried focusing on only one of them at a time? We work through several examples and practice before moving to another auxiliary. What do you think? Do you think that might work with your students? Why or why not? So it's a conversation. It's not me just trying to shove what is good teaching. My teacher had an example that he saw one time that he started in on all of this, is that he watched a supervisor interrupt a teacher, jump up and say, "You call yourself a teacher, I'll show you how to teach," and got up there and taught the rest of the class. And I'm pretty sure that original teacher probably left teaching. Why would you want to be a teacher if that was your supervisor, right? So we want to have a much more collaborative sort of thing. I'm going to skip these because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So in conclusion, fact-based observation we want to use as the basis for our notes. And then from there, we can add in our judgments and our suggestions and our questions and all of that. But when we start with fact-based observation, what happens is we have a much more common language between us that we can use to then apply to our ideas about what best practices are. We can choose our words really purposefully and carefully and use positive language even when we're giving the harshest of corrective feedback. We can be collaborative. And this is what we can all try to build our teaching toolboxes so that we all become better at what we do. Even if you aren't a teacher anymore and you're only a supervisor, for example, don't you still want to have these conversations so that you can become a better supervisor and working with different teachers in different contexts? And then we can engage together in a process that finds many alternatives and to achieve all of our teaching objectives and basically create a process and a culture and a dynamic that removes the fear and instead supplants it, puts instead in this culture of co-exploration and collaboration. So that's, and remember our objective is to remove fear, use positive language, and set new challenges. So again, for example, your challenge is going to be to blah, 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 blah. Okay. A quick example, I had a teacher, a student who was my student. He was an undergraduate, and he resisted this fact-based observation stuff the whole term, the whole time. Then he left, he graduated, he went off to teach in Korea for a few years. He came back, and then he came back to be a graduate student in the master's program I also teach in, and he was still resisting all of this. And he also, as a language teacher, he would get up there and give a lecture for 20 to 25 minutes without any pause or any break for the students to practice or personalize or like get their mouths around it. He wanted to be a professor, really. And I kept having this conversation that's like, well, language teaching, you know, we kind of have to like make opportunities for the students to talk, right? So finally, I tore my hair out with him because he was driving me crazy, actually. I will be honest about that, but I didn't tell him that. But I just said, okay, one day, I don't know why I thought of this. It was a brainstorm. I just came up and I said, okay, you want to give this lecture. Great. Your challenge for next week is going to be to never speak for more than 2 or 3 minutes at a time. You stop at 3 minutes, you know, when it makes sense, and then you create some activity that the students use to put it into action and give them some practice and personalization, and then they go back. Okay, well then, and then you go back and you do the part 2 and then give them practice. And then part 3 and give them practice. And he came out of that suddenly, he was like, oh my God, it was amazing. The students were so involved and so active. And it's like, and I was thinking, well, duh, but I didn't say that, of course. Okay, we're humans, right? We are humans. So we're going to think those things sometimes, but we don't say them. And so what I said is like, right? Wasn't that was so cool the way Ahmed was like suddenly participating. We haven't heard his voice all term. So this becomes very real. And he said, he came up to me afterwards and he said, you know what, Laura, this was like the best thing. What's my challenge for next week? Give me a challenge for next week. And so it was so effective that I thought, okay, and now that's part of my regular process. So let's go ahead. Thank you so much. What questions do you have for me? Oh yeah, and Santi, talking and having a cup of coffee. Beautiful thing to do together if you have that opportunity. It's so wonderful. And Santi also says it's good to hear why teachers use something. Exactly, because we can only assume until we ask them the question. I love that. Questions? Anybody? Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Savannah. Anybody have a question? Liliana, question?
I entered the last part.
Okay.
I was in another one, but it is interesting about observation.
Okay, well, and it's recorded, so you'll be able to check it out.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Lourdes, thank you so much. Anna, I'm really glad. I hope it was helpful for you. If anybody has any questions, we have another couple of minutes. How about, do you enjoy, I mean, how many of you are in this position of going in and observing teachers? I know what I'd like to do. If you don't have any questions, can you write what's one of your takeaways? What's one of the first things that pops in your mind that you're going to take away from this and use the next time you go and observe a teacher? I'd love to know from you what you would like to know, because we have about 3 minutes left.
Oh, well, they think of some ideas on what are the takeaways. Something that triggered definitely in my brain a memory was when one of my former school teachers from high school, from elementary, became my colleague, my friend, and all of a sudden he had to observe my class. And I normally do okay with observations, but that day I turned into a student in my brain.
Exactly.
I freaked out and I froze, and it was the worst class I've ever taught in my life. But then I was able to reach out to him because he was friendly enough that I could go to him. And I was like, hey, you know what? I need a second chance. This happened. I don't know why. But I think being reachable and just being positive, it is great for the teachers.
Exactly. And it's a wonderful thing if somebody can say, you know what, that was not my best teaching. Can we do this again? And a lot of times supervisors will do that, I hope, you know. Okay, cool. Silvana, you like the glows and grows. Yeah, I use those. I use them with all my students, my language students and my student teachers, and then the supervisees too. And Elena, great. You're going to take the fact-based observation. It's really cool. It's an awesome tool. Anybody else have a glow and grow? I mean, sorry, I was reading it. Anybody else have a question or a takeaway that you can add in our last minute left together? This is our good wait time, our teacher wait time.
May I? Okay, I was as I mentioned, I was not in the whole conference, but for me, it's something that is important because I am on the other side. I am observed. Something that is important for me is the feedback. That I don't know, maybe always start with something positive, but it's impossible if a teacher or a professor does everything wrong. It's impossible.
Right.
No, so you have to start with something positive. Hey, you were this way, that way, and then but you can improve. No, for me this is important. No, because if you start with something negative, oh my God, what am I doing here?
We have to start with. So that was a point I made probably before you came in. Absolutely. So I observed a teacher that the class was a complete disaster. But I started off by our feedback session by saying, I really liked your enthusiasm for your students, because she was super sweet. She was really sweet and really nice. She just couldn't handle any of the technology, the curriculum, or activities or communicative language teaching. But she was very enthusiastic, so that's where I started. Exactly. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liliana. Thank you for sharing. Energy, is that what you're taking away? Santi, you have awesome energy in the class. I've observed Santi teaching many times, and she's an amazing teacher. Lorena, did you want to share something? Oh, I guess we're a little...
Yes. Hello, everyone. Okay, my name is Lorena. I am from Lima, Peru, and I am the English coordinator at Senfotour. It's a tourist training center, but we are making the English in a different way. Because also I had the opportunity to teach the first year students. So because the coordinator says you have a lot of enthusiastic, that's the idea, to want the students, you have to take care of them, and then the rest of the teachers can continue, because I am the coordinator. So I can start the program and then they can continue. But what is your recommendation, for example, for the students that they don't want? Because the other day I had an exposition, and one of my students says, I don't want to make the exposition because I am very shy. What is your recommendation? Because he stopped. He was blocked in total. He was blocked because it wasn't a difficult exposition. It was only just to present a profile. what is your recommendation to talk with the students in the especially with the first year students, or with the students that are in a basic level?
I think there are a lot of things that we can do. The first thing is that it's super important right from the first day, the first moments of our classes as classroom teachers or as supervisors, to make sure that we create a really safe learning environment for our students. And we can ask them questions. If he's saying, I can't do this, I'm blocked, I just can't do it, then I might sit down with him or her and just say, okay, what can we do? Which little piece, what little tiny piece forward do you think you could take? Maybe I would try some suggestions of just little baby steps, and then you build on them. So we set little teeny baby steps for each level, where then what they can do is then they have success with that. And then we build another baby step on, and then another and another. But we have to change the pace for some of our students because otherwise they'll become, like you said, blocked, and we'll never reach them. So we have to figure out how to reach each student and how to teach each student.
Thank you.
And that's not easy, but I think it's important.
It's not easy. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Dee has a great suggestion. Maybe they can do the first presentation looking towards you instead of the class. Exactly. That's a great suggestion. Really great suggestion. I think it's okay to say, yeah, we're going to try something a little bit different with this student. And I tell my students, it's like, you're not all the same. You know that. You can see that from each other. Some of you are better with grammar. Some of you are better with speaking. Some of you are better with writing, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I think we are out of time, but I thank you all for your participation and your questions. Flexibility. There we go, Dee. Absolutely. One of my favorite words. In fact, my bestie and I, we say flexi. I'm flexi. But it's key.
Laura, it's been a pleasure having you here. I think this is helpful, not just for coordinators or supervisors, but for everyone. Liliana, it was great hearing from you as well. It just confirms a little bit of what we were speaking here. So it's amazing to always have that feedback from you, teachers. Please make sure that you join us on stage. We have a surprise for you. So make sure you follow us there. We have also the handouts here of this session over here on top. It's pinned by Rachel there. So you can just click on that Drive document and download it. And remember, you have the replay to watch any session that we have had so far. Laura, again, it's been amazing being here with you. Thank you so much. And we hope to definitely have you on our next Revolution. It's been amazing.
Thank you. I have another session tomorrow for questions and questioning with teachers. And just quickly about the handouts there's an article in there that explains some of the background feedback and a whole bunch of examples of things that you can use or adapt for your centers. Please feel free to use them. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.